Okay, so I'm sitting with Kristin Thomson, and she's a social researcher and a musician, an indie record label owner, and consultant for Future of Music Coalition, which is a national nonprofit that advocates for musicians. Since 2011, Kristin has also been co-director of Future of Music Coalition's Artist Revenue Streams project, which is a multi-method, cross-genre examination of how musicians' income streams are changing over time, which makes her really, really wonderfully qualified to talk today with me post my recent article on Forbes, where I brought up some ideas and thoughts about how artists should be thinking about streaming music services such as Spotify. After I wrote the article and Forbes posted it, Kristin emailed me and brought up some points that I just thought were incredibly valuable, and I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to talk with you today about Kristin. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, George. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So one of the things that you said was that you know, on balance, you thought that the points in the article that I made, which in summary was that the payments for artists are really sort of de minimis, for lack of a better word. Doesn't mean they should be, doesn't mean it's right, but that's where they are right now. And my point was we should think about other ways in which to extract value from these services. And one of your points was, yeah, I mean, maybe they are not, maybe the payments aren't adequate right now or correct, but doesn't mean they're necessarily insignificant. And you mentioned, for example, Sound Exchange as being something that was relevant.
Sure. Yes, and for 2 points to sort of that I had a reaction to with the article. One of them was that I'm glad that you tried to provide some context for readers about the current payments received by musicians when their music is streamed on new platforms. And yes, they are fractions of pennies per play, which seems way, way too small if we're just focusing on that one stream of revenue generated from one service. But as we've found through our artist revenue streams work, there's many more ways that musicians and composers, the songwriters that write the songs, can make money from their compositions, their sound recordings when they perform, or their brand. Some of these new streams which didn't even exist 10 years ago, because the landscape has changed and licensing and copyright has sort of changed a bit in the interim. So as part of our artist revenue streams work, we've documented all these possible sources of income. And through the research, we've learned that the mix of income streams on which musicians rely today varies greatly by the roles they play, their musical genres they work in, their career trajectory, and other factors like who's on their team, are they on a label, and all those things. Great. So I think that the article I'm trying to sort of expand on the point that we have to think about these debates within a much wider ecosystem and see that the landscape is changing in many ways.
Sure, and I mean, it's hard to be comprehensive in a relatively short piece, and you know, I didn't even try to be, frankly. I mean, it was more just a reaction of, hey, let's look at what's out there right now. Let's hear some of these concerns and then try to figure out a way forward. And I know that's what your work has been, you know, through your career. Mine too, by the way. But it's a challenging landscape. So one of the things that I had thought about, and I actually talked about this with the artist Zoe Keating. This must be 2 or 3 years ago, where I got annoyed with the again, I'm hesitant to say the word small payments. They are small. They're undeniably small. I don't know if it seems on the surface wrong. But in any case, I got annoyed with that. And I said, you know, these services should be providing some type of other information. And Zoe and I sort of on Twitter were talking about, well, maybe they should give emails or analytics. And that's something you've been working on too, I think, in terms of pushing these services, or at least suggesting these services maybe provide other value beyond the fraction of pennies.
Yeah, I agree with you that even though it's been 10 years of development, I think we're still at early stages of some of these streaming services, and I think the eventual winner in a currently crowded marketplace will be the one that satisfies users and musicians simultaneously. And what you point to, what Zoe Keating and other very smart musicians have mentioned, are these things like encouraging discovery beyond just like, if you like this band, you might like this band, which the recommendations are fine, but we know that there's a lot more potential there. Could you trace Dave Grohl's musical history from Foo Fighters back to Scream through, a very smart catalog? Or there's very little emphasis on songwriters, so very little exposure of songwriters. So there's definitely ways you could, say, trace Carole King's her songwriting career through the services and say, oh, look, I didn't know she wrote the song that the Monkees did or that James Taylor did. Like, there's definitely ways that the services could enable deeper understanding and discovery. And I think that would benefit all musicians.
Great point. What about things like data also?
Yeah, and then there's this data, and I know that Zoe Keating has been especially articulate about this, which is there a way that services could give musicians and labels and managers access to anonymize, possibly, data about the users that are listening to their music, whether it's, heat maps of where listeners are or something, and this could help musicians.
To interrupt you, go ahead. I was just going to say, so a heat map, for instance, might be something that an artist could then say, wow, I didn't know that I had this cluster of fans in Dubuque. I should tour there, or I should do it, just to sort of connect the dots. Yeah. Right.
So there's potentially some data sharing there. We'll see if that develops. I'm getting an echo.
Well, let's just keep rolling. I'm not getting it on this end, and hopefully it won't be on the recording.
There's another thing that might be great, which is making it much easier for music fans who are listening to take action on something.
Okay.
And in an optimal world, it would be great if the services gave musicians and their teams a way to sort of insert widgets onto their, sort of profile pages to either highlight upcoming tour dates, a way to purchase merchandise through one click, a way to visit their website or their wiki page. Those things are, some of them are possible through apps right now, but making it as close as possible to the listening experience, I think, could benefit everybody as well, because they'd be driving the music fan to these higher value activities that the band and management might really want fans to know and take advantage of.
And that brings up a point. I mean, I sort of intimated, and again, I was hoping for exactly what happened to a certain degree. I didn't mean to sort of upset people, but I was hoping for discussion to be generated from this conversation. And I sort of threw out some ideas about additional revenue streams, and admittedly, they weren't, the most innovative ideas. Use the streaming services exposure to sell more tickets or T-shirts. Certainly, those are things that have been talked about forever. That doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. It's just, but you, I think, have come up with 42 or so different revenue streams and I'll reference the links to that in the piece, but. Of those 42, some things maybe you could mention that people wouldn't necessarily think of, but artists should be thinking about that may connect back to these streaming services.
Well, the biggest one, and I think the most important one, is making sure that if you are a recording artist, if you make records and release things, that you should be registered with Sound Exchange, which is the digital performance royalty collection agency that is the conduit between non-interactive services to be
Pandora, Web Radio,
XM, and other digital radio stations. And since Sound Exchange collects money from them, and then it pays it out directly and simultaneously to the record label and to the performers. And this is Sound Exchange's payments have grown every quarter since it started about 10 years ago. And the last quarter, they paid out $150 million. And personally, I've benefited from Sound Exchange, and I think if musicians are participating in this, even if they're not an active band, it's important to recognize that Sound Exchange is a conduit for a new revenue stream. Mm-hmm. That's one, but there's all sorts of other ways. I mean, just to think about how technology has made it possible for bands to create bundles of things, meaning if, say, you want to give away an MP3 on your website or using a service like Bandcamp, which is a very flexible sales platform. Say you want to give away an MP3, but bundle it with a T-shirt. These ways of creating sort of bundles that put things together and things you think are valuable to your fan base is possible now. And I think you see some more bands and labels experimenting with that.
Yeah, that was some interesting feedback I got. Was it's like, look, I'm in the music business. I don't want to be in the T-shirt business, and I get that.
Yeah.
So be in the music business. I mean, so connect directly with your fans and give them more ways to buy music that's whether it's live performances or demos or there's all sorts of ways that you can create new revenue streams exclusively on music. That it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in the T-shirt business. That was just sort of used as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I love the bundling idea.
Yeah.
So any sort of last words or thoughts on this topic? And I can pretty much promise you I will be coming back to you for more words and thoughts in the future. But anything specifically today?
As much as it seems challenging for musicians to try and do all of this things, but they want to perform and create music and just enjoy their life as an artist. It is important for them to understand how this landscape is changing and how they should be participating in it. Future Music Coalition tries to build tools and resources to make it a little bit easier to understand, because I will guarantee you it's not easy and it changes a lot. Because even if you think of yourself as somebody who will have teammates and managers and labels to help you, it's important to understand it because you don't want to leave money on the table. And it's also important that musicians, that they engage in this debate that we're having right now, because it really is important for musicians to have a voice in these conversations to ensure they're fairly compensated in the future.
Couldn't agree more. And this debate is such a crucial one. I know you've done this. I've done this too. I think I can speak for you in saying that all we really want is for artists to be able to continue to create their art on their own terms, and to open up new streams so that they're able to do it full time as much as they want. I mean, that's always been my goal, and I sense it's yours as well.
Absolutely, it is. And we understand that musicians all have different ambitions and motivations. We want to make sure that everyone has the ability to attract fans and be fairly compensated for their work.
Kristin Thomson, you're fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, George.
Bye.